Kevin Warsh has now been appointed as the new chairman of the Federal Reserve in place of Jerome Powell. So the question now is, will he lower the interest rates or not? I think he eventually will, but I don't think it's going to lower the mortgage interest rates. And here are 5 reasons why. Reason number 1. There's a toxic relationship between the headlines and the news reporting on the market expectations and how people react to it before it even happens. We would think Trump wants to lower rates, and if Trump appointed Kevin Warsh, then he's going to lower interest rates, right? If he lowers the interest rates, then more people will be out looking for homes. And so I better buy a house right now before everyone else jumps in. Let's be honest. How many of us thought the same exact way? And how many of us do you think went out there and bought a home? And what does that do to the consumer confidence in spending? Well, it essentially gives resilient numbers for the economy, and as a result, it forces the hand of the federal government not to lower interest rates. Of course, it's not that simple, but you get the picture. So let's put it this way. The more the market tries to outpace the headlines and the news of lower rates, the more upward pressure there is on the rates. Well, how do you fix that? I'm not an economist, but I would just say let the market do its thing. Please. Don't overregulate it. Don't underregulate it. Most of the mess that happened in the past was always due to overregulation. Let people who overspeculate pay the price and fall out so other younger leaves on that capitalist tree would grow, and let others who are participating, let them learn the cost of not participating in the market. That's how we grow as species. We learn from our mistakes. Reason number 2. This is probably the most misunderstood part. Most people think that the Federal Reserve controls the mortgage rates. They actually don't, at least not directly. The Fed controls short-term interest rates, and that affects things like credit cards, car loans, home equity line of credits, short-term borrowing. But a 30-year mortgage is a long-term loan. So mortgage rates care a lot more about what investors think about inflation, risk, and the economy will look like over the next several years. So here's the easiest way to understand it. Think of the Fed like that privileged brother or sister that dad gave them control over the thermostat in the house. If the house is too hot, then they try to cool it down. And if the house is too cold, what do? They try to warm it up. But now imagine that the house has windows open everywhere, inflation coming through one window, oil prices coming through another window, the bond market coming through another window, consumer confidence coming through another window. So yeah, the Fed can play with the thermostat all day long, and it might help. But if the heat is coming in from every direction, the house may still be pretty hot. That is what is exactly happening with mortgage rates. The Fed can influence them, but they cannot magically force them down. And that takes us to reason number 3. This is the part everyone needs to understand. Some might disagree, but mortgage rates are more impacted by the bond market than the Federal Reserve. Here's a simple version of that. When someone gets a mortgage, that loan often gets bundled with other mortgages and sold to investors as mortgage-backed security. So let's imagine I'm an investor, who can afford to buy a bunch of bundles of that, and I'm looking at this product, and I'll probably be asking, if I buy this mortgage-backed investment, what return do I get? 5%? Okay. Wait. There's another product I could buy. I could buy Treasury bonds. What is Treasury bond? Treasury bonds are considered much safer because they're backed by the U.S. government themselves. Okay, so how much do I get in return? Well, the U.S. government is offering investors around 4.6% on a 10-year Treasury yield right now. So not 30 years like mortgages. That's considered one of the safest places to park your money in the world today. So now imagine that the mortgage bundle guys come to me right now and say, hey buddy, buy these mortgage-backed securities instead. What do you think I'm going to say? Why would I take more risk for the same return? That is exactly why the mortgage-backed securities have to offer a higher interest rate or higher return in order to compete with the Feds themselves. And that's passed on to the borrowers. And thus the reason we're sitting around 6.5 or 6.8% right now. So if the Treasury yields stay high, that usually keeps the mortgage rates high. And that's why I keep saying the Fed controls the thermostat, but the bond market has the higher influence on the mortgage market. And that takes us to reason number 4. Let's be honest. The war in Iran is essentially a global conflict. It's hurting everyone in the world, and every day that is passing by is making the inflation problem exponentially worse. And that's the reason why the Fed would not be able to lower the interest rates quickly. I mean, that's going to blow up the cost of energy, which already skyrocketed. If gas prices go up, the cost to move almost anything goes up. Food has to be transported. Construction materials have to be transported. Appliances, furniture, lumber, concrete, supplies, all of it moves through an energy system of some sort. So if energy gets more expensive, the cost of goods is going to rise too. And when the cost of goods rises, inflation becomes harder to control. That puts the Fed in a really difficult position. Because how can the Feds aggressively lower interest rates if inflation is already being pushed higher by energy costs? That's putting fuel on fire. And that's the problem. And that takes us to reason number 5. Even if mortgage rates come down, let's assume they do, that doesn't automatically fix the affordability problem. Why? Because inventory is still a major issue in most markets. So even if rates drop and inventory stays tight, nothing is going to happen more than buyers having to come back, and there will still be not enough homes. So instead of homes becoming more affordable, you may just have to get more competitive. And that means more multiple offer situations, more buyers waiving contingencies, more bidding wars, more pressure on prices. So lower rates might help your payments a little bit, but if prices jump because of demand, then it essentially burns whatever you might end up saving from having a lower rate to begin with. And that's why, my friends, I don't think the Fed rate cut automatically saves the housing market. So will the Fed lower the rates? Maybe. But will the mortgage rates automatically fall because of it? Not necessarily, and honestly, I don't think so. It doesn't instantly make homes affordable. The real story, it's not about the Federal Reserve. The real story is really behind inflation, the bond market, the oil prices, the inventory, and the buyer and the seller behavior right now. So my last thought is this. None of it actually matters. The only two jobs that these guys have is to keep inflation under control and the unemployment low. That's it. What is the true yield to your finances? Don't buy a house unless it yields something for you and your family or loved ones. And it doesn't have to be financial. Money is not everything after all. Maybe you want a home to see your kids grow in it and mark up their height on a board. Maybe you want to grow old with your loved one and want to be able to reminiscent these memories within these walls. What matters most is your economy. Focus on your economy. This is Mina, and I'll see you next time.